Chapter 1. The Omega Who Always Smiled. When they finally found the Omega, he was asleep on the concrete floor of a storage room behind an old bookstore. The middle of winter. No heater. No blanket. No food. Just a thin jacket and a smile that had finally disappeared. For 3 days, nobody knew where Ethan Hale had gone. For 3 days, his phone had remained off. For 3 days, the city continued moving as if nothing had happened. And then the strongest alpha in the city kicked open the storage room door. The moment Lucas Reid saw Ethan curled up on that freezing floor, something inside him snapped. Because for the first time, Lucas wasn't looking at the cheerful Omega everyone loved. He was looking at the truth. The truth nobody had noticed. The truth Ethan had spent years hiding. The truth that made Lucas want to drag every person who had ever said, "He's always fine," into that room and force them to look. Because Ethan wasn't fine. He hadn't been fine for a very long time. And by the time anyone realized it, the Omega Who Always Smiled had already broken. 3 months earlier. Morning, Ethan. The cafe erupted into smiles the moment Ethan stepped through the door. Customers waved. Coworkers greeted him. Someone immediately handed him an apron. Another customer shouted from across the room, "You're late by 2 minutes. My coffee tastes worse without you." Laughter filled the cafe. Ethan laughed too. "Then I guess I'd better fix that." The entire room relaxed. It always happened. Whenever Ethan entered, the atmosphere brightened. People loved him. Not because he was handsome. Not because he was an Omega. But because Ethan somehow made everyone feel important. He remembered birthdays. Favorite drinks. Important exams. Job interviews. Pet names. Tiny details everyone else forgot. And somehow, despite working more than anyone there, he always smiled. Always. "Seriously," one coworker said while restocking cups. "I've never seen you in a bad mood." Another immediately agreed. "Same." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe I'm just lucky." Nobody noticed the slight tremble in his hands. Nobody noticed he hadn't eaten breakfast. Nobody noticed the dizziness that hit every time he stood too quickly. Because Ethan was smiling. And people tend to believe smiles. By noon, the cafe was packed. Orders piled up. Customers filled every table. The rush should have been stressful. Instead, Ethan moved through it effortlessly. Helping. Laughing. Apologizing when mistakes happened. Fixing problems before anyone complained. The perfect employee. The perfect Omega. The perfect friend. At least, that was what everyone believed. Around 1 o'clock, Ethan quietly stepped into the break room. His stomach twisted painfully. The smell of food filled the small space. Coworkers opened lunchboxes. Sandwiches. Rice bowls. Hot meals. Ethan reached into his backpack. Inside was a single bottle of water. Nothing else. He stared for a moment. Then smiled. "It's fine." The words were automatic now. A younger employee suddenly entered looking upset. "I forgot my lunch." Immediately Ethan stood. "Take mine." The girl blinked. "You haven't eaten yet." "I'm not hungry." A lie. A very practiced lie. 5 minutes later, she was eating while thanking him repeatedly. Ethan sat nearby drinking water. Smiling. Pretending the sharp ache in his stomach didn't exist. Outside the break room, nobody would have guessed anything was wrong. But somewhere across the city, an alpha named Lucas Reid was about to walk into Ethan's life. And unlike everyone else, Lucas was going to notice. Chapter 2. The Customer Who Noticed. The cafe's lunch rush was finally slowing down when the bell above the entrance chimed. Ethan barely looked up. "Welcome." The greeting came automatically. Another customer. Another order. Another smile. But this customer didn't immediately approach the counter. Instead, he stood near the entrance for several seconds. Tall. Broad shoulders. Expensive suit. The scent of cedarwood and winter pine lingered faintly around him. Alpha. A powerful one. Several customers recognized him instantly. Whispers spread through the cafe. "Isn't that Lucas Reid? The publishing company CEO? What's he doing here?" Ethan didn't pay much attention. Rich people visited occasionally. They ordered coffee like everyone else. Nothing special. By the time Lucas approached the counter, Ethan was already preparing another customer's drink. "What can I get for you?" Ethan asked with a smile. Lucas studied him for a second. Not rudely, just quietly. "A black coffee. Medium or large?" "Medium." Ethan entered the order. "Name?" "Lucas." The alpha's eyes remained on him. Most alphas looked directly at an Omega's face. Lucas seemed to notice everything else. The worn cuffs of Ethan's uniform, the dark circles beneath his eyes, the slight paleness of his skin, tiny details most people ignored. Ethan handed over the receipt. Your order will be ready soon. Thank you. Simple interaction. Nothing memorable. At least for Ethan. But when Lucas moved to a nearby table, his attention kept drifting back toward the Omega. Not because Ethan was beautiful. Not because of attraction. Something else felt strange. Everyone around Ethan seemed happy. Customers smiled at him. Coworkers laughed with him. Yet every time Ethan thought nobody was looking, his expression changed. Only for a second. A tiny drop in the corners of his mouth. A brief exhaustion in his eyes. Then the smile returned. As if someone had flipped a switch. Lucas noticed. Most people wouldn't. Years of negotiating with executives and investors had taught him how to read people. And Ethan's smile felt practiced. Not fake. Just heavy. The bell above the register rang again. Another order. Another customer. The cafe became busy once more. Lucas opened his laptop and tried focusing on work. 20 minutes later, a loud crash interrupted the room. Everyone turned. A tray had slipped from a customer's hands. Coffee spilled across the floor. The customer immediately panicked. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. Before anyone else could react, Ethan rushed forward. It's okay. The customer looked horrified. I ruined everything. No, you didn't. Ethan knelt to clean the mess. Still smiling. Still reassuring them. Still making them feel better. Even though it wasn't his mistake. Lucas watched silently. Most people would have been annoyed. Most people would have sighed. Ethan didn't. Yet somehow, that made Lucas more concerned. Not less. Because normal people got frustrated sometimes. Normal people got tired. Normal people complained. But Ethan never seemed to. And that wasn't normal at all. An hour later, Lucas finally packed his laptop. As he approached the counter to leave, he noticed something. Ethan had stepped into the break room. The door hadn't fully closed. For a brief moment, Lucas saw inside. Every employee was eating lunch. Every employee except Ethan. The Omega sat alone with a bottle of water. Nothing else. No food. No meal. Just water. Then the door shut. Lucas stopped walking. A strange feeling settled in his chest. Maybe Ethan had already eaten. Maybe he wasn't hungry. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Yet something about the image bothered him. More than it should have. The CEO left the cafe. But for the rest of the afternoon, he found himself thinking about the smiling Omega. The one everyone seemed to love. The one everyone assumed was happy. The one who drank water while everyone else ate. And for the first time in a long time, Lucas found himself curious about a stranger. Because the more he thought about Ethan Hale, the less that smile made sense. Chapter 3. The lie became a habit. The next morning, Ethan woke up to cold air and silence. For a few seconds, he stayed beneath the blankets, staring at the ceiling. His body ached. His head hurt. And his stomach was already empty. The clock read 4:57 a.m. 3 hours of sleep. Again, a sharp knock suddenly echoed through the apartment. Ethan froze. Once. Twice. 3 times. His heart sank. He already knew who it was. The landlord. Slowly, he walked to the door. Ethan. The man's voice came through the wood. I need the rent by Friday. Ethan swallowed. I know. You said that last week. I know. A long silence followed. Then the landlord sighed. I'm giving you 3 more days. Footsteps disappeared down the hallway. Ethan remained standing there. Motionless. 3 days. 3 days to somehow find money he didn't have. 3 days to solve a problem that already felt impossible. His phone vibrated. A message from the bookstore owner. Can you cover an extra shift today? Ethan stared at it. His body begged him to say no. His exhaustion begged him to say no. His bank account didn't give him that option. Of course. The reply was sent before he could think. Because survival had become a routine. And routines were easier than fear. By noon, the cafe was crowded again. Customers lined the counter. Coffee machines hissed. Orders filled the screen. And Ethan smiled through all of it. As usual. Good morning. Welcome back. Your usual? Nobody noticed the slight shake in his hands. Nobody noticed the way he leaned against the counter when he thought nobody was watching. Nobody noticed that his smile took a little longer to appear today. Nobody except one person. Lucas Reid. The Alpha had returned. The moment he entered, his eyes automatically found Ethan. Something about that realization annoyed him. He wasn't usually interested in strangers. Yet there he was. Watching. Observing. Trying to understand. The Omega looked worse than yesterday. Not dramatically. Not enough for others to notice. Just enough. The shadows beneath Ethan's eyes had darkened. His skin looked paler, and every movement seemed slightly slower. Lucas frowned. The bell above the register rang. Another customer approached Ethan. An elderly Omega. She struggled with several shopping bags. Without hesitation, Ethan stepped around the counter. "Let me help you." The woman smiled gratefully. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't have to. I want to." 5 minutes later, Ethan was carrying her bags to her car. Despite looking like he could barely stay standing himself, Lucas watched through the window. His frown deepened. The Omega helped everyone. Literally everyone. Yet nobody seemed to ask whether Ethan needed help too. The answer came later that afternoon, and it happened by accident. Ethan was carrying a tray of drinks when dizziness suddenly hit. Hard. The room tilted. Voices blurred. For one terrifying second, he couldn't feel his legs. The tray slipped. Several cups crashed to the floor. Silence filled the cafe. Every customer turned. Ethan froze. Embarrassment flooded his face. "I'm so sorry." The apology escaped immediately, even though he was the one swaying on his feet. Even though his vision still hadn't recovered. "I'm sorry." The manager rushed over. "It's fine." But Ethan was already kneeling. Already cleaning. Already apologizing. As if the broken cups mattered more than whatever had almost happened to him. Lucas stood. For the first time. Something about the scene genuinely irritated him. The Omega looked seconds away from collapsing. Yet his first instinct was to apologize. Why? Why was he acting like this? Why was nobody concerned? One customer laughed. "Looks like Ethan finally made a mistake." Another smiled. "Even sunshine has cloudy days." Everyone treated it like a joke. Nobody saw what Lucas saw. The way Ethan's fingers trembled. The way his breathing had changed. The way he quietly pressed one hand against his stomach when nobody was looking. The Alpha sat back down. But he couldn't focus on work anymore. Because for the first time, a disturbing thought entered his mind. What if Ethan wasn't okay? What if everyone had simply become so used to his smile that they stopped looking beyond it? That evening, after finishing his cafe shift, Ethan walked toward the bookstore. The city streets glowed beneath the setting sun. His steps felt heavier than usual. The dizziness hadn't completely disappeared. Neither had the hunger. A nearby bakery released the scent of fresh bread. His stomach twisted painfully. Ethan slowed. Just for a moment. The display window was filled with warm pastries. Sandwiches. Cakes. Fresh bread. The cheapest item cost more than he could spare. He looked away and kept walking, unaware that a black car had stopped across the street. Unaware that Lucas Reid had seen the entire thing. The hesitation. The longing. The disappointment. The immediate decision to walk away. The Alpha stared through the windshield. Something cold settled inside him. Because suddenly, the water-only lunches, the exhaustion, the trembling hands, the skipped meals, they didn't look like separate incidents anymore. They looked like pieces of the same puzzle. And Lucas was beginning to understand the picture. Unfortunately, the truth was much worse than he imagined. Because while Lucas was trying to figure out why Ethan looked exhausted, Ethan was trying to figure out how to avoid becoming homeless in 3 days. Chapter 4. 3 days. 3 days. That number followed Ethan everywhere. Every customer. Every coffee. Every smile. Every breath. 3 days. The landlord's warning echoed inside his head like a ticking clock. By Thursday evening, he had done the math at least 20 times. The answer never changed. No matter how carefully he calculated. No matter how much he hoped. He was still short. Very short. And tomorrow was Friday. "Ethan." He blinked. A customer stood in front of him, smiling. "Everything okay?" The question almost made him laugh. Almost. Of course. The answer came automatically. The customer smiled back and left. Another lie added to thousands of others. At some point, lying had become easier than explaining. Because people only asked how you were expecting one answer. Fine. Good. Great. Nobody wanted the real version. The one that kept him awake at night. The one counting every coin. The one terrified of losing the apartment. The one exhausted beyond words. So Ethan gave people what they expected. A smile. Always a smile. Across the room, Lucas noticed. Again. The delay. Tiny. Barely noticeable. But it was there. Every time someone asked Ethan how he was doing, there was a split second before he smiled. As if he needed to put it back on. Lucas couldn't stop seeing it now. And the more he noticed, the more it bothered him. Because everyone else seemed blind. That evening, after finishing work, Ethan headed to the bookstore. The owner immediately frowned when he saw him. "You're pale." "I'm okay." That's exactly what someone who's not okay says. Ethan laughed softly. The older beta didn't laugh back. "You need rest." "I need money." The words slipped out before Ethan could stop them. Silence followed. For a moment, both men froze. Ethan quickly smiled. "Sorry, bad joke." But the bookstore owner kept staring. Because it hadn't sounded like a joke. Not at all. Near closing time, Ethan's phone vibrated. A message. His stomach dropped. "Landlord. The apartment will be locked tomorrow evening if payment isn't received." Ethan stared at the screen. His chest tightened. "Locked. Tomorrow." The message blurred. He quickly locked the phone before anyone could see, then returned to organizing shelves. As if nothing had happened. As if his entire life wasn't falling apart. As if tomorrow wasn't about to change everything. The next morning arrived too quickly. Friday. The final day. The cafe bustled with activity. Customers laughed. Orders piled up. The world continued normally. Only Ethan felt the countdown. He checked his bank account during break. Then checked again. Maybe he'd made a mistake. Maybe some payment hadn't appeared yet. Maybe. No. The number remained exactly the same. Not enough. His throat tightened. For the first time in years, genuine panic began creeping in. What was he supposed to do? Who could he ask? His family? There wasn't one. Friends? Most were struggling themselves. Coworkers? He couldn't burden them. The thoughts spiraled. And for the first time, the smile became difficult. Really difficult. That afternoon, Lucas arrived as usual. But today something was different. The moment he entered, he noticed it. Ethan's smile looked fragile. Like glass. Like something that might shatter if touched. The Omega still greeted customers. Still helped everyone. Still laughed. Yet the brightness was gone. And Lucas felt an unexpected sense of unease. Because whatever Ethan had been hiding, it was getting worse. Not better. Around 6 o'clock, disaster struck. The cafe manager approached Ethan, looking uncomfortable. "Ethan." The Omega looked up. "Yeah. We have a problem." His stomach dropped instantly. The manager sighed. "The payment processor failed this week." Ethan stared. "What?" "We've been trying to fix it all day." The manager rubbed his forehead. "Payroll will be delayed." For a second, Ethan couldn't breathe. Delayed. No. No. Not now. Anything but now. When? The manager hesitated. Maybe Monday. Monday. The word hit harder than any physical blow. Because Monday was too late. Way too late. The manager kept talking. Apologizing. Explaining. Ethan heard none of it. The world had become distant noise. Monday. He needed the money today. Not Monday. Today. Across the cafe, Lucas watched the entire conversation. Watched the color leave Ethan's face. Watched the Omega grip the counter. Watched him force a smile afterward. A smile that looked painful. And for the first time since meeting him, Lucas stood immediately. Something was wrong. Seriously wrong. He didn't know what. But his instincts screamed it. Yet before he could approach, Ethan disappeared into the staff room. The door closed. And inside, finally alone, the smile vanished completely. Ethan sat down heavily. His hands covered his face. The room felt too small. His chest felt too tight. His eyes burned. No. Not here. Not now. He couldn't break now. Not yet. Just a little longer. One more shift. One more smile. One more day? The thought repeated inside his head. But for the first time, Ethan wasn't sure he believed it anymore. And outside the staff room door, Lucas Reid stood frozen. Because through the narrow gap before the door clicked shut, he had seen something he never thought he'd see. Ethan crying. Just for a second. One brief second. But enough. Enough to destroy the image everyone believed. Enough to prove the smile was never the truth. And enough to make Lucas realize that whatever burden Ethan was carrying, he was carrying it completely alone. Chapter 5. The door that wouldn't open. Lucas couldn't stop thinking about the tears. It had only been a second. A single second. Most people would have missed it. But he hadn't. And now it refused to leave his mind. Because tears didn't match Ethan. Not the version everyone knew. Not the smiling Omega who made entire rooms brighter. Yet Lucas had seen the truth. The smile wasn't unbreakable. The person behind it was hurting. Badly. The question was, how badly? When Ethan left the cafe that night, the city was already dark. His final shift at the delivery warehouse ended close to midnight. By then, exhaustion felt like a second skin. His body moved automatically. One foot, then the other, then another. The cold wind bit through his thin jacket, but he barely noticed. His mind was somewhere else. The landlord, the rent, the payment delay, the apartment, the future. Everything felt like a wall closing in. His phone vibrated. A message. His stomach immediately dropped. Landlord. Payment not received. Locks will be changed at midnight. The apartment is no longer available after tonight. Ethan stopped walking. For a moment, the world became completely silent. Even the traffic seemed distant. He stared at the screen, reading the message again, and again, and again, as if the words might change. They didn't. The apartment was gone. Just like that. Gone. 20 minutes later, he stood outside the building, staring at the entrance. The hallway lights glowed warmly through the glass. Home. Or at least it had been. Slowly, Ethan climbed the stairs. 4th floor. Apartment 407. His apartment. His hand reached for the key. The lock didn't move. His heart sank. No. Please. Again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. The lock had been changed. Just like the message said. The realization hit harder than he expected. Everything he owned remained inside. His books. His clothes. The few photographs he still kept. The blanket his mother had given him years ago. Everything. Gone. For several seconds, he simply stood there. Not moving. Not speaking. Not breathing. A neighbor opened their door. Looked at him. Then quietly closed it again. Nobody asked if he was okay. Nobody asked what happened. The building continued exactly as it always had. While Ethan's entire world collapsed in a hallway. The first laugh escaped him unexpectedly. A tired one. A broken one. Because somehow this felt ridiculous. He'd spent years trying. Years working. Years sacrificing. Years smiling. And somehow he still ended up here. Locked out. Alone. Homeless. The laugh disappeared. His eyes burned. He looked upward, blinking rapidly. No. Not here. Not now. He couldn't cry here. Not in a hallway. Not where strangers could see. So Ethan picked up his backpack, turned around, and walked away. Across the city, Lucas sat in his office. The building was nearly empty. Most employees had gone home hours ago. Yet he remained at his desk, working, or pretending to, because his attention kept drifting elsewhere. Back to a smiling Omega. Back to tired eyes. Back to hidden tears. Back to questions with no answers. Finally, Lucas closed his laptop. Enough. Tomorrow he'd stop by the cafe again. Maybe talk to him. Maybe ask something. Maybe. His phone buzzed. An incoming call. The cafe manager. Lucas frowned. They weren't close friends. The call felt strange. Hello. Lucas, sorry for calling this late. What happened? A pause. Then, you know Ethan, right? Immediately, Lucas sat up straighter. What about him? We've been trying to reach him. A strange feeling formed in Lucas's chest. He isn't answering. So, we need him tomorrow. The manager hesitated. Nobody's heard from him. Lucas almost laughed. The concern seemed excessive. Until he remembered something. The tears. The exhausted expression. The delayed payroll. The trembling hands. Suddenly the manager's concern didn't feel excessive at all. It felt justified. Meanwhile, Ethan sat on a bench near the river. The city lights reflected across dark water. Cold winds swept through the night. His backpack rested beside him. Everything he owned now fit inside it. A few clothes, some books, a charger, a wallet, and not much else. The realization should have felt devastating. Instead, he mostly felt numb. Maybe because he was too tired to process it. Maybe because survival mode had taken over. Or maybe because there was simply nothing left to feel. His phone battery flashed red. 3%. Then 2. Then 1. Ethan stared at the screen. Several unread messages waited. Coworkers. The bookstore owner. The cafe manager. People asking questions. People checking in. People who probably cared. Yet Ethan couldn't bring himself to answer. Because he didn't know what to say. How do you tell someone you've become homeless? How do you admit you're drowning after spending years pretending you could swim? The battery died. The screen went black. And suddenly Ethan felt completely disconnected from the world. Alone. Truly alone. Around 2 a.m, he finally stood. His legs protested immediately. The cold had settled deep into his bones. He needed somewhere warm. Somewhere safe. Somewhere he wouldn't be noticed. Then he remembered. The bookstore. The old storage room behind the building. Employees occasionally used it for inventory. Nobody visited overnight. It would work. Just for one night. Just until he figured things out. That's what he told himself. One night. Nothing more. As dawn approached, Ethan unlocked the small back entrance with a spare employee key. The storage room smelled faintly of cardboard and dust. Old books filled shelves along the walls. A small space remained near the corner. He sat down slowly, then leaned against stacked boxes. Exhaustion crashed into him immediately. The kind that went deeper than physical fatigue. The kind that came from carrying too much for too long. For the first time in years, there was nobody to smile for. Nobody to reassure. Nobody to protect from the truth. Just silence. And himself. His eyes slowly closed. The cold floor pressed against his side. His breathing grew heavier. And somewhere deep inside, the final thread holding him together snapped. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just quietly. Like everything else in Ethan's life. As sleep finally claimed him, he whispered words nobody was there to hear. I'm tired. 3 simple words. The most honest thing he'd said in years. And across the city, Lucas Reid stared at the dark screen of a phone that nobody was answering. A feeling of dread settling deeper with every passing hour. Because he still didn't know where Ethan was. And something told him that by the time he found out, it might already be too late. Chapter 6. The Search. By Saturday afternoon, Ethan had been missing for almost 24 hours. The cafe was unusually quiet. Not because there were fewer customers. Because Ethan wasn't there. His absence felt wrong. Like a light that had suddenly gone out. Still nothing? A coworker asked. The manager shook his head. No calls. No messages. Everyone exchanged worried glances. For the first time, people were noticing something strange. None of them actually knew much about Ethan. They knew his favorite coffee. They knew he liked books. They knew he smiled a lot. But his address? No. Family? No. Emergency contact? No. The realization left an uncomfortable feeling in the room. How could someone work beside them for years and still be a stranger? Lucas arrived shortly after noon. The moment he entered, he knew something had changed. People looked worried. Tense. The manager immediately approached. Still haven't heard from him. Lucas frowned. When was the last time anyone saw him? Friday night. The answer sat heavily between them. The manager rubbed his forehead. I thought he was just taking a day off. So did I. The older beta looked exhausted. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. I checked his apartment. Lucas straightened. And the beta hesitated. Then quietly said, he doesn't live there anymore. Silence. The words hit harder than anyone expected. What do you mean? The manager asked. The landlord locked him out. Shock spread across every face. What? He was behind on rent. Nobody spoke. Because nobody knew. Not one of them. The happiest person they knew had been struggling to keep a roof over his head. And none of them had noticed. The bookstore owner looked away. I should have. His voice cracked. I knew he was working too much. Guilt settled over the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. Lucas felt something tighten painfully inside his chest. Because suddenly every strange thing he'd noticed made sense. The skipped meals. The exhaustion. The extra shifts. The trembling hands. Ethan wasn't overworking himself for ambition. He was surviving. And he had been doing it alone. The search began immediately. The manager checked local hospitals. Coworkers contacted friends. The bookstore owner visited places Ethan mentioned occasionally. Nothing. No sign of him. Hour after hour passed. The city seemed impossibly large. Every lead ended nowhere. Every phone call brought disappointment. And with every passing hour, Lucas felt increasingly restless. A feeling he didn't understand. He barely knew Ethan. So why did this bother him so much? Why couldn't he stop thinking about him? Why couldn't he stop imagining that tired smile? Late that evening, Lucas found himself standing inside the bookstore. The lights were dim. The owner was preparing to close. You should go home, the older beta said. Lucas ignored the suggestion. Instead, his gaze drifted around the room. Bookshelves. Reading tables. Storage areas. Then something caught his attention. A coat. Folded neatly behind the counter. Were you expecting him today? The owner looked at the coat. His expression softened. He keeps that here. Lucas frowned. Why? A long silence followed. Then the beta answered quietly. Because he was always cold. Lucas felt his stomach drop. The bookstore owner laughed bitterly. Now that I think about it. He looked devastated. I don't think I ever saw him buy anything for himself. The realization hurt. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was believable. Painfully believable. As the owner locked up for the night, Lucas prepared to leave. Then he noticed something. A faint light near the back hallway. Did you leave something on? The owner frowned. No. Both men exchanged glances. The bookstore should have been empty. Slowly, they walked toward the rear storage area. The hallway felt strangely quiet. Each step echoed. Lucas didn't know why his pulse was suddenly racing. Maybe instinct. Maybe fear. Maybe hope. The storage room door stood slightly open. A narrow gap. Just enough to reveal darkness beyond. The owner pushed it wider. And froze. Completely froze. Lucas stepped forward. Then stopped. The world seemed to disappear. Because there, curled against a stack of boxes, was Ethan. Still wearing the same clothes. Still clutching his backpack. Asleep on the concrete floor. Thin. Pale. Exhausted. Alone. For a moment nobody moved. The sight was too heartbreaking. Too real. Too unfair. The bookstore owner covered his mouth. A broken sound escaped him. Ethan. The Omega didn't wake. He looked beyond exhausted. Like someone who had finally run out of strength. Lucas stared. And suddenly every piece of the puzzle slammed together. The smiles. The lies. The skipped meals. The endless shifts. The rent. The tears. Everything. And beneath all of it, one devastating truth. Ethan had never been okay. Not once. Slowly, Lucas removed his coat. Then knelt beside him. The concrete floor was freezing. Yet Ethan hadn't complained. Hadn't asked for help. Hadn't told anyone. His jaw tightened. A strange mixture of anger and heartbreak burned through him. Not anger at Ethan. Never at Ethan. Anger at the fact that someone so kind had suffered this much while everyone, including Lucas, watched from a distance. As Lucas carefully draped the coat over Ethan's shoulders, the Omega stirred slightly. For the first time in 2 days, Ethan opened his eyes. And the first thing he saw was Lucas Reid kneeling beside him, looking more worried than anyone had ever looked for him before. For a second, Ethan couldn't understand why. Then Lucas quietly spoke. 3 words. Words Ethan hadn't heard in a very long time. Let's go home. Chapter 7. You don't have to do this alone. Let's go home. The words hung in the air. For a moment, Ethan thought he had imagined them. Maybe he was still dreaming. Maybe exhaustion had finally broken his mind. Because nobody had ever said those words to him before. Not like this. Not as an offer. Not as a promise. Not as if he actually belonged somewhere. The storage room was silent. The bookstore owner stood nearby, visibly trying not to cry. Lucas remained kneeling in front of him. Waiting. Not pushing. Just waiting. Ethan slowly sat up. Every muscle in his body protested. His head pounded. His vision blurred slightly. The coat draped over his shoulders slipped. He grabbed it automatically. Warm. The realization hit harder than expected. Someone had covered him with it. Someone had worried. Someone had noticed. His chest tightened painfully. I'm fine. The words escaped on instinct. The same lie he'd used for years. The bookstore owner actually laughed. A broken laugh. Ethan. The older beta wiped at his eyes. Please stop saying that. Silence. The Omega looked down, unable to meet either of their gazes. Because suddenly the lie sounded ridiculous. Sitting on a concrete floor. Homeless. Exhausted. Hungry. Found sleeping in a storage room. And still saying he was fine. The truth felt impossible to hide now. Yet admitting it felt even harder. Lucas spoke softly. When was the last time you ate? Ethan hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. The alpha's jaw tightened. Yesterday morning. The confession came quietly. The bookstore owner closed his eyes, as if physically hurt by the answer. Yesterday morning. More than a day. Lucas stared at him. Something inside him twisted painfully. Not pity. Something deeper. Something far more dangerous. Because suddenly he wanted to fix this. Immediately. He wanted food. Warmth. Safety. A bed. Anything. Everything. And the intensity of that urge surprised him. 30 minutes later, Ethan sat inside Lucas's car. The heater ran softly. Warm air filled the cabin. For the first time in days, he wasn't cold. The realization alone nearly made him emotional. The city lights blurred beyond the window. Neither man spoke much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy, filled with things neither knew how to say. Eventually, Lucas handed him a paper bag. Ethan blinked. What's this? Food. The Omega immediately tried refusing. You don't need to. Eat. The tone wasn't harsh, just firm. Very alpha. Very impossible to argue with. Reluctantly, Ethan opened the bag. The smell alone made his stomach twist. Fresh sandwiches. Fruit. Warm soup. His mouth watered instantly. Embarrassment flooded him. Lucas pretended not to notice, giving him dignity, giving him privacy, giving him an escape from humiliation. It was such a small kindness. Yet Ethan felt strangely emotional, because kindness without judgment was rare. Very rare. They arrived at Lucas's home shortly before midnight. Ethan stared. The place looked enormous. Elegant. Warm. Expensive. The exact opposite of everything he'd known recently. I can't stay here. Why? The simple question caught him off guard. Why? Because he was a burden. Because he had nothing to offer. Because people eventually got tired of helping. Because the reasons sounded less convincing when spoken aloud. Lucas seemed to understand anyway. One room. The Alpha unlocked the door. Until you figure things out. Ethan swallowed. Lucas. For the first time, his voice cracked. The Alpha paused, and finally looked directly at him. Not through him. Not past him. At him. I don't know how to repay you. Something flickered across Lucas's expression. Sadness. Maybe. Or frustration. I'm not helping you because I want something. The words landed harder than expected. Because Ethan had spent years believing help always came with conditions. That kindness had limits. That eventually people expected repayment. Lucas continued quietly. I'm helping because you need help. And somehow, that was the hardest thing for Ethan to hear. The guest room was warm, clean, safe. A soft bed occupied the center. The moment Ethan saw it, exhaustion crashed into him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept properly. Maybe weeks. Maybe months. The room blurred slightly. His eyes burned. No, not now. He'd already embarrassed himself enough. Yet as he stood there, staring at the bed, something inside him finally broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly. The way cracks spread through glass. One moment it looks whole. The next moment it isn't. A tear slipped down his cheek. Then another. Then another. Ethan quickly looked away, ashamed. But a voice stopped him. Ethan. Gentle. Careful. Lucas stood in the doorway, concern visible in every line of his face. The sight made things worse. Because nobody should look that worried over him. Nobody should care this much. Yet Lucas did. And Ethan didn't understand why. I'm sorry. The apology escaped automatically. Lucas immediately frowned. Why are you apologizing? The question stunned him. Because he genuinely didn't know. For crying? For existing? For causing trouble? For needing help? The answer should have been obvious. Yet he couldn't find one. And that realization hurt. Because it meant apologizing had become a reflex. A habit. A survival mechanism. Lucas took a slow breath. Then said something that shattered the final wall Ethan had built around himself. You don't have to earn the right to be cared about. Silence. Complete silence. Ethan stared at him. The words echoed inside his chest. Again, and again, and again. You don't have to earn the right to be cared about. Nobody had ever told him that. Nobody. The tears came harder. Years of exhaustion. Years of loneliness. Years of pretending. Years of carrying everything alone. All crashing down at once. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan stopped fighting them. Lucas didn't tell him to calm down. Didn't offer empty advice. Didn't try to fix everything. He simply stayed, standing nearby, making sure Ethan wasn't alone. And somehow, that meant more than anything else. Because after years of smiling for everyone else, someone had finally stayed long enough to see the person behind the smile. And they hadn't walked away. Chapter 8. The Scariest Thing. The next morning, Ethan woke up in a panic. For one terrifying second, he didn't recognize the room. Soft mattress. Warm blankets. Sunlight filtering through clean curtains. Silence. His heart raced. Then memory returned. Lucas. The bookstore. The storage room. The guest room. Slowly, his breathing steadied. Yet something strange happened. Instead of relief, guilt appeared. Heavy. Immediate. Because the bed was too comfortable. The room was too nice. The kindness felt too undeserved. And after years of surviving alone, being cared for felt unfamiliar. Dangerously unfamiliar. Downstairs, Lucas was already awake. Working from the dining table. Coffee sat beside his laptop. Several unread emails waited. None held his attention. Not when he heard hesitant footsteps approaching. He looked up. Ethan stood near the entrance. Looking uncertain. Like someone afraid they had overstayed their welcome. Morning. The Omega smiled automatically. The familiar smile. But weaker now. More honest. Morning. Lucas noticed immediately. And somehow preferred this version. The one that didn't look forced. The one that looked real. Sit. Ethan obeyed, almost nervously. A few moments later, breakfast arrived. And for the first time, Lucas watched Ethan eat a proper meal. The sight should not have affected him. Yet it did. Because every few bites, Ethan slowed down. Almost as if he was trying to make the food last longer. Almost as if he still expected it to disappear. The realization hurt. More than Lucas wanted to admit. Over the next week, a routine formed. A surprisingly comfortable one. Lucas worked. Ethan rested. The bookstore owner visited often. Coworkers checked in constantly. People worried. People cared. And slowly, Ethan began realizing something. His disappearance had mattered. To more people than he thought. That knowledge felt wonderful. And heartbreaking. Because if he had known earlier, maybe he wouldn't have carried everything alone for so long. One afternoon, the bookstore owner arrived carrying a box. Inside were dozens of small notes. Ethan frowned. What is this? The older beta smiled sadly. Messages. The Omega blinked. Messages. From customers. Confused, Ethan opened the first note. Thank you for always recommending books to my daughter. The second, you remembered my son's graduation when nobody else did. The third, I hope you're okay. The fourth, please come back soon. The fifth, the sixth, the seventh. His hands began trembling. By the 10th note, tears blurred the words. Because he hadn't realized. Not really. All those small interactions. All those tiny acts of kindness. People had remembered. People had noticed. People cared. The realization left him speechless. That night, after everyone left, Ethan sat alone in the living room. The box rested on his lap. Lucas found him there. Quiet. Thoughtful. Different. You okay? The question made Ethan laugh softly. Not because it was funny. Because for the first time, he could answer honestly. I think so. Lucas smiled. A genuine smile. And somehow Ethan couldn't look away. That frightened him. More than homelessness. More than loneliness. More than uncertainty. Because Lucas had become important. Far too important. And important people could leave. Important people could disappear. Important people could break your heart. The realization terrified him. Days became weeks. The warmth between them grew naturally. Small conversations became longer. Shared meals became routine. Comfort appeared quietly, like sunlight slowly filling a room. Neither acknowledged it. Yet both felt it. Especially Lucas. Because somewhere between searching for Ethan and helping him recover, something had changed. The concern had become attachment. The attachment had become affection. And the affection was becoming dangerously close to love. The realization arrived unexpectedly. One rainy evening, Lucas returned home later than usual. The meeting had run over time. Traffic had been terrible. His phone battery had died. Nothing unusual, at least for him. Yet the moment he opened the front door, Ethan appeared. Immediately, almost instantly, relief flooded the Omega's face. Raw, visible, unfiltered. You're okay. Lucas blinked. Of course. Ethan quickly looked away, embarrassed, as if he hadn't meant to reveal that much. But it was too late. Lucas had seen it. The worry, the fear, the relief. The realization arrived unexpectedly. One rainy evening, Lucas returned home later than usual. The meeting had run over time. Traffic had been terrible. His phone battery had died. Nothing unusual, at least for him. Yet the moment he opened the front door, Ethan appeared. Immediately, almost instantly, relief flooded the Omega's face. Raw, visible, unfiltered. You're okay. Lucas blinked. Of course. Ethan quickly looked away, embarrassed, as if he hadn't meant to reveal that much. But it was too late. Lucas had seen it. The worry, the fear, the relief. And suddenly something settled firmly inside his chest. Something undeniable. Because nobody had ever looked that relieved simply because he came home. Not employees. Not colleagues. Not acquaintances. Only Ethan. The realization followed Lucas upstairs. Stayed through dinner. Stayed through the evening. Stayed through the night. Until finally he accepted the truth. He was in love. Completely. Irrevocably. Terrifyingly. In love. Unfortunately, the same night Lucas realized his feelings. Ethan made a decision. A decision born from fear. The most dangerous kind. Because healing had changed things. He felt stronger now. More stable. More capable. And with strength came a terrifying thought. Maybe it was time to leave. Before he became too attached. Before Lucas became impossible to lose. before this temporary kindness turned into heartbreak. The thought made his chest ache, yet he couldn't ignore it. People left. They always did. And if Lucas left someday, Ethan wasn't sure he'd survive it. So perhaps it was safer to leave first. Safer to protect himself. Safer to run. Even if every part of him desperately wanted to stay. And neither man realized that by morning. Everything between them was about to change. Chapter 9. Stay. Ethan barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, the same thought returned. Leave. Leave before this hurts more. Leave before Lucas becomes someone he can't live without. Leave before hope turns into heartbreak. By sunrise, his decision felt final. At least that's what he told himself. The packed bag beside the bed said otherwise. Because despite everything, he hadn't actually left. Not yet. Downstairs, Lucas sat alone at the kitchen table. Coffee untouched. Emails unanswered. His mind was occupied by exactly one person. Ethan. The realization from the previous night refused to disappear. He loved him. Not because Ethan was perfect. Not because he needed saving. But because Ethan was kind when nobody was watching. Because he remembered everyone's birthdays. Because he gave away food when he was hungry himself. Because he carried pain quietly and still chose kindness. Because somehow, after everything life had done to him, he remained gentle. Lucas loved all of it. And that terrified him. Because loving someone meant they could hurt you. It meant they mattered. And Ethan already mattered far too much. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Lucas looked up and immediately noticed the backpack. His stomach dropped. The room suddenly felt colder. Ethan. The Omega stopped. For a moment neither spoke. Then Ethan smiled. The familiar smile. The one Lucas hated now. Because it usually meant Ethan was hiding something. I've been thinking. Lucas already knew he wasn't going to like what came next. I should probably leave. Silence. Heavy silence. The words landed like a punch. Why? The question came out quieter than intended. Ethan looked away. I've already stayed too long. No. The answer was immediate. Firm. Certain. Ethan blinked. Lucas rarely interrupted people. Yet he hadn't even hesitated. You haven't. The Omega swallowed. Lucas. You haven't. The repetition carried unexpected emotion. Enough to make Ethan pause. For several seconds neither moved. Then Lucas stood. Slowly. Carefully. As if approaching something fragile. Tell me the real reason. Ethan froze. Because there it was. The question he'd been avoiding. The truth he didn't want to say aloud. Lucas stepped closer. Is it because you don't want to stay? No. The answer escaped instantly. Too quickly. Too honestly. Both men noticed. The room fell silent again. And suddenly there was nowhere left to hide. Ethan looked down. His hands trembled slightly. I want to stay. His voice cracked. The confession hurt. Because it was true. Painfully true. I want to stay so much that it scares me. Lucas felt his heart stop. For a moment he couldn't breathe. The Omega continued quietly. Eyes fixed on the floor. People leave. The words sounded simple. Yet years of pain lived inside them. My parents. A pause. Friends. Another pause. People who promised they'd stay. His voice grew weaker. So, I learned not to depend on anyone. Lucas listened. Not interrupting. Not rushing him. Just listening. I learned how to survive alone. Ethan laughed softly. A sad sound. And then you showed up. The room suddenly felt very small. Very intimate. Very honest. You cared. His eyes glistened. You worried. Another tear slipped free. You stayed. Lucas felt his chest ache. Because nobody should sound surprised by being cared about. Yet Ethan did. As stupid as it sounds. The Omega smiled shakily. I don't want to lose that. The final words barely rose above a whisper. And if I stay, I'm going to need you. Silence. Then, Ethan. The Alpha's voice was gentle. Steady. Certain. The Omega finally looked up. And immediately wished he hadn't. Because Lucas was looking at him like he mattered. Like he was precious. Like losing him would hurt. And that expression nearly broke him. Lucas closed the distance between them. Not completely. Just enough. Enough to be heard. Enough to be understood. You know what terrified me? Ethan blinked. What? The storage room. The answer surprised him. Lucas continued. The moment I saw you sleeping on that floor. His jaw tightened. I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if we'd found you one day later. Ethan's breath caught. Lucas. I was angry. The Alpha laughed softly. Not at you. His eyes softened. At myself. The confession hung between them. because Ethan had never considered that possibility. You barely knew me. I know. Lucas smiled. And somehow it didn't matter. The words settled directly into Ethan's heart. The silence that followed felt different. Not uncomfortable. Not uncertain. Just full. Like both of them were finally standing in the truth. No masks. No excuses. No pretending. Lucas took another step closer. You're wrong about one thing. Ethan frowned slightly. What? The alpha's expression softened. If you stay, his voice dropped. You won't be the only one needing someone. The world seemed to stop. For one impossible second. Neither moved. Neither looked away. And suddenly Ethan understood. Not the words. The feeling behind them. The truth Lucas wasn't quite brave enough to say yet. The same truth Ethan had been trying desperately not to feel. His eyes burned. Not from sadness. From relief. From hope. From being seen. Truly seen. Maybe for the first time in his life. When Lucas gently reached for his hand, Ethan didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined naturally. Comfortably. Like they belonged there. No dramatic declarations. No grand gestures. Just warmth. Just certainty. Just two people who had spent far too long feeling alone. The simple touch said more than either could. And for the first time, Ethan didn't feel like he was standing on the edge of abandonment. He felt safe. That evening, neither mentioned leaving again. The packed bag remained untouched. Dinner lasted longer than usual. Conversation came easier. Laughter appeared more often. And when Ethan smiled, really smiled, Lucas realized something. This smile looked completely different from the one he'd worn at the cafe. This one reached his eyes. This one wasn't hiding pain. This one was happiness. And Lucas found himself wanting to protect it for the rest of his life. Neither said, I love you. Not yet. But both knew they were getting dangerously close. And for the first time, neither of them wanted to run from it. Chapter 10. The smile that was real. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't afraid to wake up. It was a strange feeling. A beautiful one. No panic about rent. No calculations running through his mind before sunrise. No fear of choosing between food and bills. Just warmth. Just safety. Just peace. The realization still felt unreal sometimes. As if he might wake up and discover it had all been a dream. Yet every morning, the same thing happened. Lucas was still there. And somehow that meant everything. A month later, Ethan returned to the cafe. Not because he needed the job anymore. Because he wanted to visit. The moment he stepped inside, chaos erupted. Ethan. Several coworkers practically tackled him. Customers immediately recognized him. The manager looked suspiciously close to tears. Even regular customers left their tables to greet him. For several overwhelming minutes, everyone talked at once. Questions. Stories. Complaints about how much they missed him. The attention left Ethan speechless. Because all this time, he thought nobody would notice if he disappeared. Yet apparently he'd been wrong. Very wrong. You scared us. One coworker smacked his arm. Another immediately hugged him. The manager shook his head. Never do that again. Ethan laughed. And for the first time, the laughter felt completely genuine. Not forced. Not performed. Real. Across the room, Lucas watched quietly. The sight filled him with something warm. Because Ethan looked different now. Healthier. Stronger. Lighter. The constant exhaustion was gone. The shadows beneath his eyes had faded. The smile looked natural. And perhaps most importantly, he no longer looked alone. The bookstore owner appeared beside Lucas. Watching the same scene. We almost lost him. The older beta spoke softly. Lucas nodded. The thought still haunted him. Some nights, he remembered the storage room. The freezing concrete floor. The exhausted figure curled against cardboard boxes. And every time, the same protective instinct returned. The same fierce certainty. Never again. That evening, rain covered the city. Soft. Gentle. The kind Ethan had always loved. After dinner, he stood on the balcony overlooking glowing streets below. The cool air brushed against his face. Behind him, the apartment door opened. Lucas stepped outside, carrying 2 mugs. He handed one over. Ethan accepted it with a smile. Thanks. For several moments they simply stood together, watching the rain. Comfortable silence. The kind that only existed between people who trusted each other completely. Eventually Ethan spoke. You know? Lucas glanced toward him. What? The Omega laughed softly. I used to hate rainy days. Really? Ethan nodded. They made everything feel colder. His gaze drifted toward the city lights. They reminded me how alone I was. The confession settled quietly between them. Then he smiled. But not anymore. Lucas looked at him. Really looked at him. And something inside his chest tightened. Because Ethan sounded happy. Truly happy. And somehow that meant more than any success Lucas had ever achieved. Ethan. The Omega turned. Immediately noticing something different. Something serious. His heartbeat quickened. Because Lucas looked nervous. Actually nervous. Which was almost impossible. What is it? For a moment, the Alpha said nothing. Then laughed quietly. As it turns out, he rubbed the back of his neck. I'm not very good at this. Ethan blinked. At what? The answer came seconds later. And stole every remaining thought from his mind. I love you. Silence. Complete silence. The rain continued falling. Cars moved below. The city lived on. Yet Ethan heard none of it. Because those 3 words had just changed everything. Lucas continued before he could respond. As if afraid stopping would make him lose courage. I think I started falling for you long before I realized it. His voice softened. I noticed you. A small smile appeared. Then I worried about you. Another step closer. Then I cared. The distance between them disappeared. And somewhere along the way, his eyes never left Ethan's. You became the first person I wanted to come home to. The confession shattered every remaining wall Ethan possessed. Because all his life, he had wanted to matter to someone. Not because he was useful. Not because he worked hard. Not because he helped everyone. Just because he was Ethan. And Lucas did. Tears filled his eyes immediately. Embarrassing. Uncontrollable. Perfect. The Alpha smiled softly. You're crying. Ethan laughed through the tears. You're ruining the moment. I thought the crying already did that. The Omega actually snorted. Then laughed harder. Which somehow made the moment even more perfect. Because for once there was no pretending. No masks. No performance. Just honesty. Just love. Just them. I love you too. The words escaped quietly. Yet Lucas looked as if he'd been handed the entire world. The reaction alone made Ethan emotional all over again. Because nobody had ever looked happier simply because he existed. Not once. Until now. Slowly, Lucas lifted a hand. Giving Ethan every opportunity to move away. He didn't. Not even slightly. The Alpha's fingers brushed his cheek gently. Carefully. As if touching something precious. Something worth protecting. Something worth keeping. And then, finally, Lucas leaned forward. The kiss was soft. Tender. Unhurried. Not desperate. Not overwhelming. Just full of everything they had never said. Every worry. Every fear. Every promise. Every feeling. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan found himself smiling. Not the smile he wore for customers. Not the smile he used to hide pain. Not the smile he forced during difficult days. This smile came from somewhere deeper. Somewhere honest. Somewhere healed. Lucas noticed immediately. And his expression softened. There it is. Ethan blinked. What? The real one. The Omega laughed. Then shook his head. You noticed? I always notice. The answer nearly made him cry again. 1 year later. The apartment was filled with laughter. Friends crowded the living room. The bookstore owner argued with the cafe manager. Someone dropped a plate. Someone else blamed another person. Absolute chaos. And Ethan loved every second of it. Because it was his birthday. And for the first time in his life, people had gathered specifically for him. Not because they needed something. Not because he was helping. Because they cared. A photo album sat on the table. Lucas handed it over. Ethan opened it carefully. Page after page. Memories. Recovery. Laughter. Road trips. Bookstores. Rainy days. Quiet moments. Happy moments. A life he never thought he'd have. The final page contained only a single photograph. A picture taken without his knowledge. Ethan smiling on the balcony. Looking completely at peace. Beneath it were handwritten words. Thank you for staying. The tears arrived instantly. Lucas pulled him into a hug as everyone laughed. And for once, Ethan didn't apologize for crying. He simply held on. Because after years of being invisible, after years of being overlooked, after years of believing nobody would notice if he disappeared, he finally understood something. He had always been worth noticing. He had always been worth loving. Someone simply needed to see it. And when Lucas Reid did, he never looked away. The end. Epilogue. The life he never thought he'd have. 2 years later. The apartment looked different now. Not because the furniture had changed. Not because the walls had been repainted. Because it felt lived in. Warm. Loved. Home. A stack of books occupied the coffee table. A half-finished puzzle sat near the window. A blanket was draped across the couch. And somewhere in the kitchen, Lucas was unsuccessfully trying to cook breakfast. Again, Ethan, a loud voice echoed through the apartment. The Omega immediately laughed. What happened this time? Lucas appeared moments later, holding a frying pan, looking personally betrayed by it. The eggs attacked me. The eggs attacked you. Violently. Ethan shook his head. You're a CEO. I'm being bullied in my own kitchen. The Omega laughed harder. The sound filled the apartment. Bright. Genuine. Happy. Lucas paused, still amazed that he got to hear that laugh every day, even after all this time. Especially after all this time. Because there had once been a version of Ethan who smiled to hide pain. Now he smiled because he was happy, and Lucas would never stop being grateful for that. Life had settled into something beautiful. Ethan worked as an editor for Lucas's publishing company. The bookstore owner still called twice a week. The cafe manager still complained whenever Ethan visited and didn't stay long enough. Friends came and went. Birthdays were celebrated. Holidays were shared. Ordinary moments became treasured memories. The kind of life Ethan used to watch other people have. The kind of life he never believed could belong to him. Yet somehow, it did. The first sign appeared on a Tuesday morning. Ethan stared at his coffee, then immediately pushed it away. Lucas frowned. You okay? The Omega nodded, then froze, then immediately ran toward the bathroom. The Alpha was on his feet instantly, concern replacing confusion. Several minutes later, Ethan emerged looking embarrassed. Lucas looked worried. Should we call a doctor? No. Are you sure? Probably. The answer wasn't convincing. Not even a little. A week later, things became stranger. Certain foods suddenly smelled terrible. Others became irresistible. Ethan nearly cried because the grocery store ran out of his favorite fruit. Actually cried when Lucas accidentally finished the last container of ice cream and fell asleep halfway through a movie. Lucas was officially concerned. That's it. The Alpha pointed dramatically. We're going to the doctor. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again, because honestly, he was starting to suspect the same thing. The doctor's office felt unusually quiet. The wait felt endless. Ethan's hands twisted together nervously. Lucas noticed immediately. Without hesitation, he reached over and held them. The simple gesture helped. A little. Finally, the doctor entered, a smile already forming. And somehow, Ethan knew, before a single word was spoken. You are. The doctor looked delighted. Congratulations. Silence. Complete silence. Then, what? Ethan blinked. The doctor laughed. You were expecting. For a moment the world stopped. Neither Ethan nor Lucas moved. Neither spoke. Neither breathed. Expecting. A baby. Their baby. The realization hit all at once. Ethan looked down, then back up, then immediately burst into tears. The doctor looked alarmed. Lucas looked emotional. The Omega laughed through the tears. I'm happy. His voice cracked. Really happy. And somehow that made him cry even harder. The drive home was unforgettable. Lucas kept glancing at him every 30 seconds, as if making sure he was still there, still real, still carrying the future they had just been given. Eventually Ethan started laughing. What? The Alpha shook his head. I can't believe it. Neither could Ethan. Not completely. Because years ago, he'd sat alone in a freezing apartment eating instant noodles, convinced nobody would notice if he disappeared. Now someone was already planning nursery colors. Life was strange, beautiful, and strange. The pregnancy became the center of the household. Lucas became impossible. Absolutely impossible. Are you cold? No. Are you hungry? No. Do you need water? Lucas. What? The Alpha looked completely innocent. Ethan narrowed his eyes. You asked me that 3 times in 10 minutes. Maybe you got thirsty again. The Omega laughed, then secretly loved every second of it. Because after years of facing everything alone, having someone worry about him still felt miraculous. Months passed. The baby grew. So did the excitement. The bookstore owner immediately declared himself an honorary grandparent. The cafe staff bought tiny outfits. Friends argued over names. Lucas read every parenting book he could find. Twice. And every night, without fail, he would kneel beside Ethan and rest a hand over the growing bump. A quiet smile always appearing, as if he still couldn't believe it. One evening, the baby kicked for the first time beneath his hand. Lucas froze. Completely froze. Then looked up, eyes wide. Did that just? Another kick. Ethan laughed, and Lucas looked seconds away from crying. The memory became one of Ethan's favorites. Because it wasn't the kick. It was the expression. Pure wonder. Pure love. Pure happiness. Late one night, near the end of the pregnancy, Ethan found Lucas sitting in the nursery. Alone. The room glowed softly in the darkness. Tiny books lined shelves. A small crib stood near the wall. The alpha didn't notice him immediately. He was staring around the room. Thoughtful. Emotional. Happy. What are you thinking about? Lucas looked up, then smiled. A quiet smile. The first time I saw you. Ethan laughed. I was serving coffee. You looked exhausted. I was exhausted. The alpha reached for his hand, holding it gently. I keep thinking about how close we came to never meeting. The words settled softly between them. Because it was true. One different decision. One different day. And everything could have changed. Lucas squeezed his hand. I'm glad I noticed. Tears immediately filled Ethan's eyes. Even now, years later, those words still affected him. Because being noticed had changed his entire life. Several weeks later, the apartment was filled with flowers, visitors, congratulations, laughter, and in the center of it all sat Ethan, holding a sleeping newborn. Lucas sat beside him, one arm around his shoulders, the baby sleeping peacefully between them. For a long moment nobody spoke. They simply watched. A family, their family, something Ethan once believed would never exist. The room felt warm, safe, full, home. Lucas gently kissed Ethan's forehead, the same way he had countless times before. The Omega leaned into him automatically, smiling softly, not because he was hiding sadness, not because he was pretending, but because after everything, after all the loneliness, after all the pain, after all the years of believing nobody would notice him, he finally had everything he'd ever wanted. And this time, he never had to face it alone. The story may end here, but every eclipse leaves a shadow behind. If you enjoyed this journey, like, subscribe, and share. Tell me your thoughts below, and until we meet again in another tale of love, fate, and destiny, keep dreaming beneath the eclipse.